On October 12th, 2018, in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Tennessee, a park ranger discovered 5 missing college students who had vanished 4 days earlier on the Hazel Creek Trail. Ranger Robert Sullivan found the University of Tennessee students alive and unharmed in a remote section near Bone Valley. But something was terribly wrong. Despite being lost for 4 days, they appeared impossibly clean and calm, moving in perfect synchronization and speaking in unison. What Sullivan witnessed during the 6-mile hike back to safety was so disturbing that this veteran ranger quit his job the very next day, fled Tennessee entirely, and refuses to ever enter a forest again. This is his account of what really happened when those 5 students walked out of the mountains. I need to tell someone about this. It's been 3 months, and I can't stop thinking about what happened in the Smokies last October. Day 4 of a search and rescue. 5 college kids from UT had gone missing on the Hazel Creek Trail. We'd already searched my assigned sector twice, found nothing. They sent me back to check it again anyway. Sector 7G, near Bone Valley. And if you know the Smokies, you know that's not a place you want to get lost. Remote, dense, the kind of place where the fog comes in and swallows everything. I was pissed about the assignment, honestly. Waste of time checking the same ground. But you do the job. Around 2 p.m. I heard voices. Not distressed, not calling for help. Just talking. Laughing, even. I found them sitting by the creek. All 5, clean clothes, full water bottles, looking like they'd been out for maybe an hour, not 4 days. The blonde one smiled when he saw me, mentioned they'd gotten turned around, casual, relaxed, 4 days missing, and he's acting like they overslept at a campsite. That should have been my first real warning. I radioed base immediately, told them I'd found all 5 uninjured. Diane's relief was audible through the static. When I clipped the radio back, the dark-haired girl flinched, said something about the noise being too loud. Strange reaction, but I've seen people react oddly after being lost. I verified their names against my list. Tyler, Madison, Jennifer, Brent, and David. They nodded in perfect unison when I read them off. 5 heads, 1 motion, like they'd rehearsed it. They told me they'd gotten lost near a clearing with 3 oaks where the trail splits. I'd been working these trails for 8 years. There was no clearing with 3 oaks on the Hazel Creek Trail. But I didn't correct them. You learn not to argue with survivors about details. Trauma does things to memory. When I asked if everyone could walk the 6 miles out, they stood up together. Same fluid motion, like puppets pulled by one string. They said they could walk. Not individually, not with the usual nervous energy of rescued hikers. They spoke in unison. The hike out should have taken 3 hours, maybe 4 with tired hikers. But these kids kept perfect pace with me. No stumbling, no complaints, no asking for breaks. After 4 days in the wilderness, they moved like they'd just started their hike. I tried to assess them as we walked. They claimed to be studying at UT, but when asked about their majors, 2 answered simultaneously with different responses: biology and engineering. Neither corrected the other. They just looked at each other and kept walking. The girl in the fleece mentioned they'd been eating berries to supplement their food. October in the Smokies. There are no safe berries in October, not in this part of the park. Everything's either gone to seed or poisonous. But I kept that observation to myself. 3 miles in, the fog started rolling down from the ridges, thick and fast, the way it does in autumn. Within minutes, visibility dropped to maybe 20 feet. The kids stayed exactly 10 feet behind me. I know because I kept checking. No matter how I varied my pace, slowing for rough patches, speeding up on clear trail, they maintained that precise distance. Never 9 feet, never 11, always 10. At Sawdust Creek, we had to cross on the rocks. The fog was so thick I could barely see the other side. I went first, then turned to help them across. That's when I saw their reflections in the water. The shapes were wrong. Too tall, maybe, or too many limbs, or I couldn't focus on it properly. Like trying to remember a dream, the details slipped away the moment I tried to grasp them. But I knew what I was seeing wasn't what should be there. When I looked up, all 5 were already across, standing in a semicircle watching me. I hadn't seen or heard them cross. The fog was getting thicker, and it had picked up a smell. Copper, like pennies left in your mouth. 2 miles from the parking area, they started asking me personal questions. Did I have family? Did I live alone? The quiet one, David, said I seemed like someone who lived alone. When I asked how he could know that, all 5 responded with the same words at the same time. Lucky guess. My hand went to my radio. They all took a step closer. The girl asked me not to use it again, said the noise hurt. All 5 of them were staring at me, waiting. I kept walking. What else could I do? Leave them there? 5 missing kids found safe and I abandoned them because they're acting strange? That's not how it works. You bring them out. You do the job. But I'd started cataloging everything wrong. No bug bites despite 4 days in October woods where the mosquitoes are still active. No scratches from bushwhacking through laurel thickets. Their boots looked barely worn. No mud caked in the treads. Their water bottles were full, not refilled, but full like they'd never been drunk from. 1 mile from the parking area, they stopped walking. All at once, like hitting an invisible wall. The blonde one, Tyler, announced they remembered camping in a cave. A deep cave with white formations and an underground stream. He described it in detail. The smooth limestone walls, the echo of water, the cold that never changed. I know every cave in this section of the park. What he was describing doesn't exist. More importantly, all the actual caves are closed, October through April for bat hibernation. Any ranger would have told them that. Any map would have shown it. But all 5 were nodding along, adding details. How they'd stayed warm in the cave, how they'd found it just as the first night was falling, how grateful they were for the shelter. The fog was so thick now I could barely see them, even though they were just a few feet away. Their voices seemed to come from different directions, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, like they were circling me in the mist. Then the girl in Flea said something that made my blood run cold. She said they'd met another hiker in the cave, an older man who'd shared his food with them. She described him perfectly, down to the scar on his left hand and the red bandana he always wore. She was describing Tom Hutchinson, another ranger, my friend. Tom had died 3 years ago, heart attack on the Chimney Tops Trail. I'd been one of the people who carried him out. I told them they must be confused, that they'd mixed up some details, but they insisted. All 5 of them, describing conversations they'd had with Tom in that cave that doesn't exist. How he'd told them about the good old days in the park, how he'd mentioned me by name, how he'd said I was one of the good ones, one who understood that the mountains were older than the Park Service, older than maps and trails. My radio crackled, Diane asking for a status update, When I reached for it, all 5 kids moved closer. Not stepping, not walking. They were just suddenly closer. The fog swirling around them. I gave Diane our position, said we were almost out. My voice was steady. You learn to keep your voice steady, no matter what. She confirmed EMS was waiting. The kids watched me the entire time, their faces blank, patient. The last mile felt like 10. They'd gone quiet, walking in that perfect formation behind me. The fog was starting to lift as we descended, and I could finally see the parking area ahead. EMS vehicles, search and rescue volunteers, even a news van, everyone waiting for the miraculous return of 5 lost college kids. 50 yards from the lot, they stopped again. Tyler spoke for all of them. He thanked me for finding them, said they'd been worried no one would come to the right place. The right place. Not that they'd been worried about dying or running out of food. They'd been worried about being found in the wrong place. Then he said something else. He said they'd left something for me back at the creek where I'd found them. A gift, he called it, for being the one who came to the right place at the right time. Before I could respond, all 5 walked past me toward the parking lot. The moment they hit the pavement, they transformed. Suddenly they were stumbling, crying, calling out to the paramedics. The perfect victims, traumatized and exhausted. Exactly what everyone expected to see. I watched EMTs wrap them in blankets, check their vitals. I heard them giving statements about being lost, confused, surviving on creek water and the last of their trail mix. Different story completely. Normal story. The kind that makes sense. Diane found me standing at the trailhead, still staring back at the forest. She asked if I was all right, said I looked pale. I told her I was fine, just tired. She patted my shoulder, said I'd done good work, that 5 kids were going home to their families because of me. I nodded, smiled, did all the right things. But I couldn't stop thinking about what Tyler had said, about leaving something for me at the creek. I went back the next morning, alone, off the clock. The fog was thick again at Bone Valley, but I found the spot. The rocks where they'd been sitting, the creek running black and cold, and there, placed carefully on the exact stone where Tyler had been sitting, was Tom's red bandana. The one he'd been buried with, still damp, like it had just been pulled from underground. Underneath it was a piece of paper, water-stained and dirty, but readable. 5 names were written in different handwriting. Tyler, Madison, Jennifer, Brent, David. Below that, in writing I recognized as Tom's. Impossible as that was, a single line. Some of them walk out again. I quit that afternoon. Didn't give notice, didn't explain. Just turned in my badge and left. Diane called a dozen times. I didn't answer. I looked up those 5 kids a week later. They'd made a full recovery, the news said. No lasting effects from their ordeal. They were back in classes at UT, living their lives. The article included a photo of them at some campus event. The photo showed 5 normal college kids, smiling, healthy, ordinary. But their shadows were wrong, just like their reflections had been. I don't hike anymore. I don't camp. I live in Kansas now, about as far from mountains and forests as I can get. But sometimes I dream about that fog, about voices calling through it, about Tom's bandana wet with creek water that should have dried years ago in a coffin. And sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't been the one to find them. If someone else had gone to the right place at the right time, or if no one had. Some of them walk out again. That's what Tom wrote. Some of them which means some of them don't. I've never told anyone this story. Who would believe it? 5 kids rescued, alive and well. A successful search and rescue operation, that's what the reports say. That's what everyone knows. But I know what I saw in that water. I know what I found on that rock. And I know that sometimes, in the oldest parts of these mountains, things get lost that shouldn't be found, and things get found that should have stayed lost. I check on those kids sometimes, online. They all graduated, got jobs, normal lives, but none of them ever posted about hiking again, not once. They know what they are now, what they became in that cave that doesn't exist, guided by a dead man who remembers my name. And now you know too. Some of them walk out again,